He had spent years searching for the perfect piece of land, a place where he could escape the busy city life and enjoy quiet weekends surrounded by nature. Week after week, he scoured listings, drove down winding country roads, and peeked at old properties that sometimes looked promising, but always seemed to fall short. The city had its charm, but the noise, the crowded streets, and the constant rush were wearing him down. He needed a place where mornings began with birdsong, where the sun rose over open fields, and where he could spend hours just sitting by the water, fishing or watching the wind ripple through the trees. When he stumbled upon a small property that included an old fishing lake, he felt a spark of excitement he hadn't felt in years. The listing had been modest, and the photo showed an overgrown but peaceful lake, surrounded by tall trees that shielded it from the rest of the world. There was also a small, worn dock extending into the water, clearly used by the previous owner but neglected now. The place had a sense of quiet history, as if it had been waiting for someone to care for it again. He imagined mornings walking to the dock with a cup of coffee, casting a line, and listening to the soft splash of water as fish moved beneath the surface. Evenings could be spent watching the sunset reflect off the calm water, while the occasional breeze rustled the leaves. It was exactly the kind of retreat he had been dreaming about. The process of buying the property was surprisingly smooth. The previous owner had moved away and seemed eager to sell. There were no immediate complications, and the price was reasonable for the size and location. Within weeks, the paperwork was complete, and he officially owned the land and the lake. He felt a rush of accomplishment and relief. After so much searching, he finally had his own quiet sanctuary. The thought of being able to call this place his own filled him with a sense of freedom and possibility. However, his excitement was short-lived. Just a few days after taking possession of the property, he received a notice from the local homeowners association, or HOA. At first, he thought it might be something routine, perhaps reminders about maintaining the property or paying dues. But as he read the letter, his heart sank. The HOA claimed that he had no right to use the lake, that the dock was theirs, and that he needed to remove it immediately. The letter also mentioned that if he failed to comply, they would contact law enforcement to enforce their claims. The words on the page felt heavy, as if they were trying to take away the peace and freedom he had just gained. He couldn't believe what he was reading. How could they claim ownership over something that was clearly part of the land he had just bought? Confused and frustrated, he reached out to the HOA to clarify the situation. The representative on the phone was firm and unsympathetic, insisting that the dock and lake area were for the exclusive use of HOA members. They didn't seem interested in hearing that he had purchased the property legally, and that the lake was part of his land. Each word he spoke was met with a curt reply, and the conversation ended with a veiled threat. If he didn't remove the dock, the police would be called. He hung up the phone feeling a mix of anger, disbelief, and anxiety. This was supposed to be his peaceful retreat, and now it felt like a battlefield. He knew he couldn't let the situation escalate without understanding his rights. He began spending hours researching local and state laws about property ownership and water access. He dug through online legal resources, visited the county records office, and even spoke with a few neighbors who had lived in the area for decades. The more he learned, the more confident he became. Property deeds, historical usage of the lake, and state regulations suggested that he had every right to enjoy the lake and maintain the dock. Some laws even indicated that water access in the state had certain protections that the HOA couldn't override. It became clear that the HOA's claim was not based on law, but rather on a sense of control over the area. Despite the information he was gathering, he wanted to approach the situation carefully. He didn't want a confrontation, but he also didn't want to be bullied into giving up what was rightfully his. He started documenting everything. He took photographs of the dock and lake, wrote down conversations with the HOA, and saved copies of all correspondence. Each piece of evidence was carefully organized, just in case the situation escalated further. He wanted to be prepared, knowing that knowledge and documentation could be more powerful than anger in these kinds of disputes. As days passed, he spent more time at the lake, soaking in the beauty that had drawn him there in the first place. He walked along the shore, feeling the soft grass under his feet and listening to the gentle lap of water against the dock. It reminded him why he had bought the property, why he had endured the search and the paperwork, and why he refused to let intimidation take it away from him. He imagined quiet afternoons fishing, The excitement of a tug on the line and evenings spent watching the sun sink below the tree line. These moments became a source of strength, reinforcing his resolve to protect what was his. The tension with the HOA lingered like a shadow over his enjoyment of the lake. Every visit carried a mix of calm and apprehension. He wondered when the HOA might try to enforce their threats, whether they would show up with law enforcement or attempt other forms of pressure. But each time he returned, he reminded himself that he was prepared. He knew his rights, he had evidence, and he was ready to stand firm. The lake, the dock, and the peace it represented were worth defending, not just for himself but for anyone who might own property there in the future. Slowly, he began to feel a sense of empowerment. What had started as fear and frustration was turning into determination. He realized that this challenge was more than just a dispute over property. It was a test of patience, knowledge, and resilience. He committed to handling it the right way, with calmness, research, and preparation, rather than anger or rash decisions. Each evening he spent by the lake reinforced his belief that he was not just a property owner, but a steward of a place that deserved respect and protection. Though the battle with the HOA was only beginning, he refused to let it overshadow the joy of owning the lake. He spent time sketching plans for improvements, imagining simple landscaping to keep the area natural but inviting, and thinking about small upgrades to make the dock safer and more functional. He even considered hosting friends for fishing trips, sharing the beauty of the lake with others, though he knew he would need to navigate HOA rules carefully. Each idea reminded him of why he had invested in this property and why standing up to the HOA mattered. By the end of the first week on the property, he had established a routine. Mornings were for walking along the shore and enjoying the quiet. Afternoons were for researching and organizing documents related to the property and water access laws. Evenings were for reflection and planning, sitting by the dock with a cup of tea as the sun dipped low over the lake. The tension with the HOA was still present, but he no longer felt helpless. He had a plan, knowledge, and a sense of control over the situation. This first week was a mix of exhilaration and challenge. He had found his sanctuary, yet it came with unexpected obstacles. He learned that even the most peaceful places could come with legal and social complexities. But he also discovered an inner strength and resilience he hadn't realized he possessed. The lake, the dock, and the surrounding trees were more than just land. They were a reminder of patience, preparation, and the importance of standing up for what was right. He felt ready to face whatever the HOA might do next, knowing that his connection to this place, combined with his understanding of the law, would guide him through the challenges ahead. After the initial shock of receiving the HOA notice, he spent the next few days in a mix of frustration and determination. He kept going back to the letter, rereading it carefully, trying to understand how they could claim ownership over something that was clearly part of the land he had legally purchased. It felt unfair, almost surreal that an association could challenge his right to use his own property. The more he thought about it, the more he realized he needed to approach this situation with patience and knowledge, not anger. He began by revisiting his property documents and deeds. Every page he read seemed to reinforce his understanding that the lake and dock were part of the property he had purchased. He even compared his documents with county maps and historical records, looking for any inconsistencies that the HOA might use against him. It was painstaking work, but he knew it was necessary. Each note, each highlighted section of the deed became a piece of armor he could use to defend himself if the HOA tried to escalate the conflict. During his research, he learned about water access laws in the state. These laws were designed to protect the public's right to access water bodies under certain conditions. In some areas, even if a homeowners association managed land around a lake, they could not prevent property owners or the public from using the water if legal access had been historically established. This knowledge gave him hope. It meant that the HOA's claim was not as strong as they thought. It also meant he could fight for his rights legally and not just through confrontation. He started to make a list of everything he would need if this dispute went further. He needed photographs of the dock and lake, area showing its current condition and accessibility. He needed statements from neighbors who had historically used the lake. He needed legal references that clearly supported his right to the dock and lake. He even started documenting the dates and times he visited the property, so there was a record of regular use. This was not just preparation. It was a way to gain confidence. Knowing he had a solid foundation made the challenge feel less daunting. One afternoon, he visited the lake with his camera, walking slowly along the shoreline and taking detailed photographs of the dock, the water, and surrounding areas. He noticed small details he hadn't before: the way the dock's wood had weathered over the years, the patterns of reeds along the bank, and the small fish that darted in the shallow areas near the shore. These photographs were practical evidence, but they also reminded him why he loved this place so much. It wasn't just about property rights. It was about protecting a peaceful haven he had long dreamed of enjoying. He also reached out to some of the neighbors who had lived in the area for decades. At first, they were hesitant to get involved. Many of them had their own issues with the HOA and didn't want to be caught in disputes. But as he explained his situation calmly and showed that he was simply trying to protect his legal rights, a few agreed to help. They shared memories of fishing at the lake, of using the dock to launch small boats, and of other families who had historically enjoyed the water. Their accounts added depth to his case, demonstrating that the lake had long been accessible and was not the exclusive domain of the HOA. Meanwhile, the HOA continued to send short, terse emails and letters, reiterating their claim and hinting that law enforcement could get involved. Each message was frustrating, but he resisted the urge to respond impulsively. Instead, he carefully documented each communication, noting dates, times, and content. He knew that these records could be crucial if the situation escalated further. The calm and methodical approach gave him a sense of control that he didn't have when he first received the initial notice. As he dug deeper into legal resources, he discovered stories of other property owners who had faced similar disputes with HOAs. Many had been intimidated into giving up their rights, while others had successfully defended themselves by understanding local laws and presenting clear evidence. Reading these stories strengthened his resolve. He realized that he wasn't alone in facing this kind of challenge and that persistence, patience, and preparation could lead to a positive outcome. During this time, he also began thinking about the emotional toll the situation was taking on him. Owning the property was supposed to be peaceful and rewarding, but the conflict with the HOA added stress and uncertainty. To cope, he spent more time physically at the lake, walking along the shore, sitting on the dock, and simply observing the water. He paid attention to the small details of nature, the way sunlight danced on the ripples, the calls of birds, and the gentle rustle of leaves. These moments of connection with the environment reminded him why he had sought this place in the first place and gave him the emotional strength to continue his fight. He also reached out to a local attorney who specialized in property rights, seeking professional guidance on how to handle the dispute. The attorney reviewed the deeds, maps, and legal references he had compiled and confirmed that his understanding was correct. The lake and dock were legally part of his property, and the HOA's claim had little foundation in law. The attorney advised that he continue to document everything and prepare a formal response if the HOA persisted. Having professional validation gave him confidence that he was not overreacting or misinterpreting the situation. Armed with legal knowledge, neighbor statements, photographs, and a clear understanding of his property rights, he began drafting a formal response to the HOA. He wanted to be professional and calm, not confrontational. The letter outlined his ownership of the property, referenced relevant water access laws, and included photographs and statements that supported his claim. It also invited the HOA to discuss the matter in a constructive way, rather than resorting to threats or legal intimidation. He hoped that a clear, well-prepared letter might resolve the situation without further conflict. As he worked on the letter, he also thought about potential next steps in case the HOA continued to challenge him. He considered filing a formal complaint with local authorities or seeking mediation. Each possibility was carefully weighed, but he kept returning to the idea that knowledge and preparation were his strongest tools. If he stayed organized and calm, he could handle whatever came next. The process of planning and preparing gave him a sense of purpose, turning anxiety into action. During this period, he also reflected on the larger lesson of the situation. He realized that property ownership was not just about buying land. It was about understanding rights, responsibilities, and the legal framework that protects them. He thought about how many people might be intimidated into giving up their rights simply because they didn't know the law. He felt a responsibility not only to defend his own property, but also to set an example of standing up with knowledge, calmness, and persistence. The lake and dock were more than just a personal retreat. They had become a symbol of his commitment to fairness and resilience. The days passed with a routine of research, documentation, and quiet reflection at the lake. He would spend the morning reviewing legal documents, the afternoon walking the property and talking to neighbors, and the evening drafting communications or planning his next steps. Each day he felt more prepared and more confident. The initial fear and frustration had transformed into determination and clarity. He understood the value of preparation, the importance of evidence, and the power of staying calm under pressure. One afternoon, while walking along the edge of the lake, he noticed a family of ducks gliding across the water. It was a simple moment, but it reminded him of why he had come to this place. The beauty of nature, the stillness of the water, and the freedom to enjoy it all were worth the struggle. The HOA's threats seemed smaller in comparison to the peace and joy the lake offered. This realization reinforced his resolve to protect his rights without letting anger or fear cloud his judgment. As the week drew to a close, he finalized his formal response to the HOA. The letter was clear, professional, and backed by evidence. It stated his ownership, referenced relevant laws, included photographs and neighbor statements, and invited constructive dialogue. Sending it felt like a turning point. He could no longer sit passively and wait for the HOA to act. He had taken control of the situation, using knowledge, preparation, and calm persistence as his tools. That evening, he sat on the dock as the sun set, feeling a mixture of relief and anticipation. The letter had been sent, and now it was up to the HOA to respond. He knew the outcome was not guaranteed, but he felt ready for whatever came next. The lake, the dock, and the surrounding land were his, and he was committed to protecting them. More than that, he had grown through the experience, learning about law, preparation, and the strength that comes from standing firm for what is right. The first phase of the conflict had taught him many lessons. He had learned the importance of staying calm, the power of evidence, and the value of understanding the law. He had also rediscovered why he had sought this place in the first place, for peace, solitude, and connection with nature. The lake was more than just water and land. It was a symbol of his determination, patience, and commitment. No matter what the HOA did next, he felt ready to face it, confident in his knowledge and supported by the truth of his ownership and the evidence he had carefully gathered. In those quiet moments by the lake, he reflected on how different life could be if he had ignored the situation or reacted impulsively. Instead, he had taken the path of preparation, learning, and calm persistence. He knew this approach would serve him well, not just in this dispute but in future challenges as well. The HOA might still attempt to assert control, but he now understood that knowledge, evidence, and patience were far more powerful than threats or intimidation. And as he watched the last rays of sunlight fade across the water, he felt a renewed sense of purpose and a deep connection to the land he now called his own. After sending the letter to the HOA, he spent the next few days waiting and watching, unsure how they would respond. The tension was still there, but it had shifted into something more controlled. He had done everything he could to prepare, and now he needed patience. Each visit to the lake felt slightly different. He noticed the way sunlight shimmered on the water in the morning and how the breeze carried the scent of pine and damp earth. These small moments reminded him why he had chosen this place, and they helped calm the anxiety that lingered from the HOA conflict. One morning, while walking along the shore, he saw signs of wildlife he hadn't noticed before. A pair of deer quietly crossed the far side of the lake, stopping occasionally to drink. Birds flitted among the trees singing and chirping, and a dragonfly skimmed the surface of the water. He paused to watch, taking photographs and making notes. Each photo would later become part of his documentation, showing the natural use of the property and its peaceful environment. But beyond documentation, these moments also renewed his connection to the land, reminding him why he had fought to claim it and why he intended to protect it. Days later, he received a response from the HOA. It was a short letter, repeating their claim and insisting that he remove the dock immediately. They also hinted again at contacting local law enforcement if he didn't comply. Reading it, he felt a mix of irritation and resolve. The letter was polite enough on the surface, but the underlying threat was clear. He knew he needed to respond carefully, ensuring that any reply was calm, professional, and backed by evidence. He spent hours preparing a detailed response. He started by organizing all his research: property deeds, historical maps, state water access laws, photographs of the lake and dock, and written statements from neighbors who had used the lake for decades. He arranged everything in a logical order, making it easy for anyone reading the documents to see that his ownership and right to use the dock were legally sound. Each piece of evidence strengthened his confidence and made the looming confrontation with the HOA feel less intimidating. In addition to gathering evidence, he began visiting the local library and county office more frequently. He dug through old records of the lake, finding references to its use by property owners long before the HOA had made any claims. These records included old newspaper clippings about community fishing events, historical property surveys, and maps that showed public and private boundaries. Every discovery added weight to his case and made him feel increasingly prepared to defend his rights. He also reached out to a few more neighbors, explaining the situation and asking if they would provide statements about the historical use of the lake and dock. Many were hesitant at first, fearing the HOA's disapproval, but after careful explanation, several agreed to help. They shared memories of fishing trips, small boats launched from the dock, and gatherings by the lake that had been common for decades. Each statement was written down and signed, creating a paper trail that would be difficult for the HOA to ignore. The support from the community strengthened him emotionally as well, showing that he was not alone in facing this challenge. While he prepared legally and gathered support, he also spent time improving the dock and surrounding area. He cleaned debris, repaired loose boards, and ensured the dock was safe and functional. These improvements weren't about confrontation. They were about caring for his property. He wanted to enjoy it fully while demonstrating that he was a responsible owner. The work was physical, rewarding, and meditative. Each plank replaced and nail hammered in was a small victory, a tangible sign of control and ownership. The HOA, however, did not back down. They sent another letter, repeating their demands more forcefully and now implying potential legal action. He read it carefully, noting every word, and then calmly set it aside. He did not respond with anger. Instead, he prepared a comprehensive packet to send back, including his legal research, photographic evidence, neighbor statements, and historical records. His goal was not to escalate, but to show the truth clearly and professionally. As he worked, he also reflected on his own behavior and mindset. He realized that staying calm and methodical had been crucial. At first, he had been angry and anxious, but taking the time to research, document, and plan had shifted his feelings from fear to empowerment. He recognized that understanding one's rights and preparing evidence could transform a potentially intimidating situation into one where he could confidently assert his ownership. This realization became a guiding principle. Knowledge and preparation were more powerful than threats or intimidation. One afternoon, while reviewing the documents at the lake, he noticed a small group of children playing near the water. Their laughter and splashes reminded him that the lake was meant to be enjoyed, not feared. He spoke briefly with their parents, who explained that they had been visiting the lake for generations, sometimes using the dock under informal agreements with previous owners. Their stories reinforced his belief that the lake had historically been accessible and that his use was consistent with past practice. This further strengthened his resolve to maintain his rights and protect the property. He decided to include these stories in his formal response to the HOA. Personal accounts of historical use, combined with legal research and photographic evidence, created a strong human-centered argument. It was not just about legal rights. It was about fairness, history, and community use. He wanted to show the HOA that their claims were unfounded, and that any attempt to block his access was unreasonable. The day he sent the comprehensive packet to the HOA felt significant. He had worked tirelessly, gathering evidence, documenting details, and organizing his case. Sending it was both a relief and a moment of anticipation. He knew the HOA could respond in different ways, but he felt prepared for any outcome. For the first time, the conflict felt less like a looming threat and more like a challenge he was ready to meet. He had transformed frustration and fear into action, and the result was a clear demonstration of ownership and preparedness. While waiting for the HOA's next move, he continued spending time at the lake. He walked along the shoreline, watched the fish swim beneath the dock, and listened to the sounds of nature. These moments of peace were a reminder of why he had chosen this property. They also helped him maintain perspective, ensuring that the conflict did not overshadow the enjoyment of his land. He understood that while the dispute was important, it should not consume all his energy or take away from the simple joys of living by the lake. As the days passed, he also thought about the lessons he had learned through the process. He realized that knowledge, preparation, and calm persistence were key in defending one's rights. Reacting with anger or fear would have only made the situation worse. By taking a methodical approach, he had turned a threatening situation into an opportunity to assert his rights confidently and professionally. This mindset not only helped with the HOA conflict, but also strengthened his sense of personal resilience. Neighbors began to notice the efforts he was making. Some stopped by to thank him for preserving the lake and dock, sharing their appreciation for maintaining access to the water. Others offered small acts of help, like bringing tools for repairs or sharing old photographs and stories about the lake. These interactions reinforced the community aspect of the property and reminded him that standing up for his rights also meant protecting the shared history and enjoyment of the area. The support from neighbors was not only practical but also emotional, providing reassurance that he was not alone. He also began considering the long-term implications of the conflict. Beyond his own enjoyment, he thought about future property owners and the importance of establishing clear rights and protections. By carefully documenting and asserting his ownership, he was creating a record that could help others avoid similar disputes. This perspective gave him a sense of purpose beyond personal interest, turning a challenging situation into a meaningful contribution to the local community. Through all of this, he continued improving the property and dock. He added small features like a secure handrail, cleared the surrounding area of overgrown brush, and created a small path leading to the water. These efforts were not only practical but also symbolic, showing that he was a responsible and caring owner. The dock became more than just a structure. It was a statement of ownership, care, and commitment. As the HOA finally began to consider his evidence, he felt a growing sense of empowerment. Each piece of documentation, each neighbor statement, and each photograph strengthened his case and made it increasingly difficult for the HOA to continue their threats. He realized that the battle was not just legal, it was also about perception, about showing that he was prepared, knowledgeable, and determined. This realization shifted his confidence from anxiety to assurance. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he sat on the dock, reflecting on the journey so far. The conflict with the HOA had been stressful, but it had also taught him valuable lessons about property ownership, legal rights, community, and personal resilience. He understood that standing firm required patience, preparation, and calm persistence. The lake, the dock, and the surrounding land were more than just property. They were symbols of determination and responsible stewardship. He felt a renewed sense of purpose and connection. No matter how the HOA responded, he was ready to defend his rights with knowledge, evidence, and professionalism. The lake was his sanctuary, and he would protect it with care and diligence. As the stars began to reflect on the water, he felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that he had taken control of the situation and was prepared for whatever came next. The struggle was far from over, but he now had the tools, mindset, and support to face it confidently and successfully. The days after sending his detailed packet to the HOA were filled with anticipation. He spent hours by the lake observing the small movements of nature, but his mind always drifted back to the pending response. The HOA could respond in many ways. They could back down, escalate with threats, or try legal action. Each possibility weighed on him, but he reminded himself that he had prepared for every outcome. The lake had become a place of reflection, a quiet sanctuary where he could gather strength and focus his thoughts. He began organizing a clear timeline of events, noting each interaction with the HOA, every letter, sent and received, and all documentation regarding his property ownership. Each piece of information was methodically recorded. He also made copies of every photograph of the lake and dock, each one showing historical use, improvements, and the natural state of the property. The goal was to create a complete record that would leave no room for misunderstanding or misrepresentation. One afternoon, he noticed a neighbor walking along the edge of the lake. They greeted each other, and he decided to ask more questions about the lake's history. The neighbor shared stories of fishing trips, small gatherings, and boating adventures that took place over decades. Some neighbors even recounted times when the HOA had previously tried to limit access, only to back down when residents explained the legal history. These stories became part of the growing collection of evidence, showing that the lake had been accessible to property owners long before the current HOA made its claim. Meanwhile, the HOA had begun sending increasingly urgent emails. The language was more forceful, emphasizing their supposed authority and hinting at immediate legal action. He read each message carefully, noting the tone, date, and content. Each word was important, and he maintained a detailed log. He never responded impulsively. Instead, he allowed himself to digest the message fully before planning his next move. This calm approach prevented him from reacting emotionally and ensured that every response was well thought out and legally grounded. He also considered the possibility of involving local authorities to clarify property rights and prevent any misunderstanding. Before taking that step, he consulted his attorney, who agreed that this could be a helpful move if the HOA escalated further. The attorney also reviewed his documentation, suggesting minor additions to strengthen the case. He incorporated the recommendations, ensuring that every argument was supported by both evidence and legal precedent. Each revision added to his confidence, showing that preparation and thoroughness could counter any intimidation. While handling the HOA conflict, he continued to care for the property. He worked on the dock, reinforcing it and making it safe for use. He cleared paths along the lake, planted small areas with native flowers, and kept the shoreline tidy. These actions were not just for his enjoyment. They were a statement that he was a responsible property owner. He wanted to demonstrate to the HOA neighbors and any future observers that the land was being cared for respectfully and thoughtfully. In the evenings, he would sit on the dock with a notebook, jotting down observations about the lake, wildlife, and the ongoing dispute. He also wrote down ideas for future improvements and plans to enjoy the space once the conflict was resolved. This practice helped him separate his worries about the HOA from his appreciation for the property. He realized that maintaining a balance between addressing the dispute and enjoying his land was essential for his mental well-being. He reached out to more neighbors, explaining the situation and requesting additional statements about historical use and community access. Many were initially cautious, fearing backlash from the HOA, but he approached each conversation with patience and clarity. Over time, several neighbors agreed to provide written accounts, describing years of shared access, recreational use, and even previous HOA attempts to limit access that had been unsuccessful. These statements added a personal human element to his case, showing that the lake was not just a piece of land but a cherished part of the community. As the week progressed, he noticed subtle changes in the behavior of the HOA. Emails became less threatening and more cautious, suggesting that they were beginning to recognize the strength of his case. Still, he did not let his guard down. He continued to document, prepare, and maintain the property. Each visit to the lake reinforced the connection he felt with the land, reminding him that the fight was not just about ownership but about preserving a peaceful space for himself and future property owners. He also spent time considering how to present his evidence in the most compelling way. He organized photographs chronologically, showing the dock's use and improvements over time. He categorized neighbor statements, separating historical accounts from recent observations. He created a detailed reference list of water access laws and property regulations, highlighting passages that directly supported his rights. The goal was to make the argument clear, undeniable, and easy to follow for anyone reviewing the documentation. One afternoon, while walking along the shoreline, he spotted a small family of turtles moving across a shallow part of the lake. The scene reminded him of the peaceful moments that had drawn him to this property in the first place. He realized that despite the conflict with the HOA, the lake continued to offer tranquility, beauty, and a connection to nature. These moments reinforced his commitment to protecting the property, not out of anger but out of appreciation and responsibility. The HOA eventually scheduled a meeting to discuss the dispute. He prepared thoroughly, bringing copies of all his documentation, photographs, neighbor statements, and legal references. He arrived early, reviewing notes and visual aids to ensure he could present his case clearly and calmly. The meeting was tense at first, with the HOA representatives asserting their claims and referencing rules and regulations. But he responded methodically, presenting evidence, quoting relevant laws, and referencing neighbor accounts. Each point he made was backed by careful research, making it increasingly difficult for the HOA to maintain their position. During the meeting, some HOA members seemed surprised by the depth of his preparation. They had assumed that a typical property owner would be intimidated by the threats and remove the dock without contest. Instead, they encountered a calm, knowledgeable, and well-prepared individual. The atmosphere shifted slightly as he walked them through historical use, legal precedent, and the practical implications of denying access. His calm, factual approach contrasted sharply with the aggressive tone of the HOA, gradually changing the dynamics of the discussion. After several hours of discussion, it became clear that the HOA could not substantiate their claims. Their attempts to argue control over the dock and lake were weakened by the combination of legal research, historical evidence, and neighbor testimonies. They asked questions and requested additional documentation, which he provided promptly. By maintaining professionalism and presenting a clear, evidence-based case, he demonstrated that threats and intimidation were ineffective compared to preparation, knowledge, and persistence. Following the meeting, he continued to maintain the property and document everything. He reinforced the dock, cleared paths intended to the lake area. These efforts were practical and symbolic, showing that he was a responsible and dedicated property owner. The ongoing care also helped him stay grounded, focusing on tangible work rather than worry or fear. Neighbors began to show greater support as the dispute progressed. Some stopped by with small gifts like fresh eggs or baked goods, as gestures of appreciation for his commitment to preserving the lake. Others shared memories, stories, and old photographs, enriching the historical record he was compiling. This community engagement reinforced the idea that standing up for his rights was also about protecting a shared history and a valued resource. Through this process, he learned valuable lessons about resilience, patience, and the importance of preparation. He realized that legal and personal challenges could be met effectively when approached methodically, calmly, and with clear evidence. Reacting impulsively or emotionally would have only weakened his position. By staying organized and focused, he was able to navigate the dispute with confidence and authority. As days turned into weeks, he noticed subtle signs that the HOA was reconsidering their stance. Communications became more neutral, requests for meetings slowed, and the tone shifted from aggressive to cautious. He understood that his careful preparation, community support, and calm persistence were having an impact. The conflict was far from over, but the balance of power was shifting. One evening, sitting on the dock as the sun set, he reflected on the journey so far. The conflict had tested his patience, resolve, and understanding of property rights, but it had also strengthened his connection to the lake. He realized that the struggle was about more than just ownership. It was about responsibility, stewardship, and protecting a place that held meaning for both him and the community. The lake, the dock, and the surrounding land were now symbols of resilience, careful planning, and the importance of standing firm in the face of challenges. He felt a renewed sense of purpose and determination. No matter the outcome, he had proven to himself that he could face intimidation with calm, preparation, and knowledge. The lake was a sanctuary, and he was committed to maintaining and protecting it. As the stars began to reflect on the water, he felt a quiet satisfaction. He had transformed a potentially overwhelming conflict into an opportunity for growth, learning, and community connection. The struggle with the HOA had become a defining experience, teaching him lessons that would last a lifetime and ensuring that the lake would remain a cherished place for years to come. The weeks following, the HOA meeting were filled with quiet victories and subtle changes. He continued to maintain and improve the property. Each plank replaced on the dock, each cleared path, and each trimmed bush reinforcing his sense of ownership and care. The physical work kept him grounded, reminding him that the lake and the surrounding land were more than just a legal dispute. They were a sanctuary, a place of calm, reflection, and beauty. Every visit to the lake became a mix of preparation and enjoyment, balancing vigilance with the peacefulness he had sought when purchasing the property. The HOA's communications had shifted noticeably. Threatening letters had given way to requests for clarifications, occasional questions about the legal documentation, and a softer, almost hesitant tone. It was clear that they recognized the strength of his position and the thoroughness of his preparation. Despite this, he remained cautious. Each document, each response, and each interaction was carefully logged and reviewed. His goal was to maintain clarity, transparency, and readiness for any potential next step. The calm, methodical approach that had carried him this far was now more crucial than ever. He continued to strengthen community connections, recognizing that support from neighbors could be invaluable. Small gestures of appreciation and shared memories strengthened relationships. Neighbors recounted family fishing trips, local events at the lake, and stories passed down through generations. These accounts were compiled and organized, adding depth to the historical narrative of the property. It wasn't just about asserting his legal rights. It was about preserving a shared history and a resource that had brought joy to many. Meanwhile, he began to reflect on his own growth through the conflict. What had started as shock and frustration had transformed into confidence, patience, and resilience. He had learned the importance of preparation, the power of evidence, and the strength that comes from approaching challenges calmly and methodically. The lake was no longer just a piece of property. It was a symbol of his determination, careful planning, and the rewards of standing firm in the face of adversity. One morning, he observed a family of ducks swimming near the dock, their quiet movements mirrored in the still water. He smiled, taking photographs and noting the scene in his journal. These small interactions with nature reminded him of why he had sought this land. Beyond legal disputes and documents, the lake offered peace, reflection, and joy. Protecting it had become both a practical responsibility and a personal commitment to the tranquility and beauty it represented. During this period, he also began to think about how the experience could serve others. He realized that many property owners might be intimidated by similar disputes, often giving in without understanding their rights. By documenting his process, organizing evidence, and sharing his experiences with neighbors and community members, he could demonstrate that careful preparation and knowledge could protect ownership rights effectively. The lake became a lesson in resilience, empowerment, and the importance of understanding the legal frameworks that support property ownership. The HOA eventually scheduled a final review meeting, inviting him to discuss the evidence he had compiled. He prepared meticulously, reviewing each document, photograph, and statement to ensure clarity and completeness. On the day of the meeting, he arrived early, setting up a small table with organized folders, charts, and notes. His approach was calm and professional, demonstrating both confidence and respect. The HOA representatives, who had initially been aggressive and threatening, seemed more subdued, aware that the argument was no longer simple intimidation. During the meeting, he presented his case in a structured and clear manner. He outlined the historical use of the lake, referenced state water access laws, and shared the neighbor statements documenting decades of shared access. Each point was supported by evidence, photographs, and legal references. He spoke confidently, calmly, and patiently, answering questions with clarity and providing additional documentation as requested. The HOA representatives listened carefully, occasionally taking notes and exchanging glances. It became evident that they could not substantiate their claims in the face of such thorough preparation. After several hours of discussion, the HOA representatives began to acknowledge the strength of his position. The aggressive tone from previous communications was absent, replaced by cautious recognition of the legality and legitimacy of his claims. They asked for clarifications, reviewed his evidence in detail, and slowly realized that their threats and demands could not stand up against the combination of legal documentation, historical records, and community support. It was a turning point. The balance of power had shifted, not through confrontation or anger, but through knowledge, preparation, and persistence. In the days that followed, the HOA officially backed down, confirming that he could maintain the dock and enjoy full access to the lake. The sense of relief was profound. He had successfully defended his rights without aggression, relying instead on careful research, methodical documentation, and calm professionalism. The victory was not just about retaining access to the property. It was a validation of his approach, demonstrating that preparation, patience, and knowledge were more powerful than intimidation. The resolution of the conflict also strengthened his relationship with neighbors. Many expressed gratitude for his efforts, noting that his careful documentation and defense of property rights had helped protect the lake for the broader community. They shared stories of past enjoyment, expressing relief that access would remain open and preserved. The lake became not only his sanctuary, but a shared space where history, community, and natural beauty were respected and maintained. He reflected on the journey from the moment he received the initial threatening letter to the successful resolution. The process had been challenging, requiring careful thought, organization, and a commitment to remain calm and professional in the face of threats. Each step, from researching property deeds to gathering neighbor statements and consulting legal experts, had contributed to the outcome. He recognized that this experience had strengthened his skills in problem-solving, communication, and resilience, providing lessons that would extend far beyond the immediate conflict. During this time, he also focused on enjoying the lake more fully. He spent mornings fishing, afternoons walking along the shoreline, and evenings sitting on the dock, observing the sunset and the reflections on the water. These moments of peace and connection with nature reminded him why he had purchased the property in the first place. The lake was not just a victory in a legal dispute. It was a place of personal fulfillment, reflection, and joy. He continued to maintain and improve the dock and surrounding land. Safety improvements, cleared paths, and minor landscaping reinforced his commitment to responsible ownership. These efforts were both practical and symbolic, showing that he was a caretaker of the land, not just a claimant defending a legal right. The lake and dock had become symbols of diligence, care, and the rewards of standing firm for what is just. In reflecting on the experience, he also considered its broader impact. Many in the community were inspired by his approach, seeing that calm persistence, preparation, and knowledge could effectively protect property rights. His success became a story shared among neighbors, demonstrating that intimidation and threats could be countered with professionalism and evidence. The lake, once a private retreat, had become a lesson in resilience and empowerment for the entire community. The months following the resolution were peaceful. He established routines that balanced enjoyment with stewardship. Mornings were for observation and small maintenance tasks, afternoons for leisure and reflection, and evenings for planning future improvements or simply enjoying the calm. The lake continued to offer a sanctuary, and the dock remained a tangible symbol of both ownership and care. Through the entire experience, he had learned the value of patience, preparation, and calm persistence. He had discovered that standing up for one's rights required careful research, clear documentation, and strategic thinking rather than impulsive reactions. The journey had strengthened his connection to the land, the community, and himself, leaving him with skills and confidence that would last a lifetime. As the sun set on the lake one evening, he sat on the dock feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The conflict with the HOA had tested him, but it had also shown him the strength that comes from preparation, knowledge, and calm determination. The water reflected the sky's colors, the trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the peace of the place was fully restored. He knew that the lake, the dock, and the surrounding land would continue to be a sanctuary, not only for himself but for future property owners and the community. He had not only defended his rights but had also ensured that a treasured part of the landscape would remain accessible, respected, and cared for. The journey had been long, but the lessons, victories, and memories would remain with him forever.